This video is brought to you by Magic Spoon. What's up, Wisecrack? Greg here with another look at everyone's favorite witch girlfriend and robot boyfriend. That's right, we're talking Wandavision. One of the defining aspects of the show is how it plays with familiar sitcom tropes and styles from the last 60 or so years. From the suburban setting and hammy overacting to Vision giving a to-the-camera interview, Jim Halpert style, these references create a strong, fresh tone for this MCU project. It was a risk too, as it breaks with much of what the past 13 years of the MCU has taught us to expect. For the most part, WandaVision gives us a more subdued, meandering experience than we're used to. One of the biggest ways it does this is by setting everything in the suburbs, a location most associated with things like cookie-cutter homes, kids on bikes, and neighborhood watch groups for the fellas. You know how we do. So why does the show lean so heavily into sitcom tropes, and why do they choose to place Wanda's story of repressed trauma in the relatively bland setting of the suburbs? We've got some thoughts, so draw the curtains, make sure that nosy neighbor isn't spying, and settle in for this Wisecrack edition on WandaVision and the Suburban Dream. And spoilers ahead for WandaVision and the MCU. But before we begin, I'm going to take a quick break to enjoy a bowl of Magic Spoon cereal. As an adult, breakfast always made me feel sick and tired, which sucks because as a kid it was something I loved so much and it gave me energy throughout the day. Most cereals are just sugar bombs, so as an adult, I was bound to crash midday, if not earlier. But today's sponsor, Magic Spoon, is delicious and gives me the boost I need. With 0 grams of sugar, 14 grams of protein, and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving, the nutritional value is amazing and it tastes delicious. My favorite is the cinnamon, but you can get cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter, and other great flavors like blueberry. Sometimes I like to mix the cinnamon with the peanut butter for the perfect sweet savory situation. If you're ready to try it for yourself, then click the link below to get some Magic Spoon cereal today. You can build your very own variety box, and if you use code Wisecrack, you can get $5 off. Magic Spoon is so confident in their cereal, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it, they'll refund you your money, no questions asked. So click the link below to get $5 off, or go to magicspoon.com/wisecrack to save $5 off your order today. Now back to the show. But first, a quick recap. WandaVision takes place in the post-blip world. After finding out that her ex-lover's corpse is being dissected at a lab, Wanda heads to the land of broken hearts, New Jersey. There she does a casual burst of spontaneous creation, reshaping an entire town and creating a new vision, all in ready for TV black and white. Wanda also makes some fake children, her dead brother comes back to life, and her neighbor turns out to be a witch. Eventually, Sword and the FBI will investigate the massive bubble over her new New Jersey town, and after a whole lot of drama, Wanda eventually puts things back where she found them and heads to the mountains to do some maybe bad witch training. To understand the meaning of WandaVision's deeply suburban setting, we're going to focus on 3 things from her personal life: her Sokovian heritage, the massive amount of trauma she's experienced, and her lifelong obsession with American sitcoms. Via flashbacks, we see that Wanda's creation of Westview is informed by a deep love of American television. She uses these sitcoms as a form of escapism. First, from the war-torn Sokovia of her childhood, then from Hydra's experimentation on her, then from the death of her brother. To her, sitcoms offer a vision of predictability and safety, a stark contrast from the compounding traumas that have defined her life. They offer a consistent and clear narrative in which everything works out in the end for those with good intentions. She's relied on this coping mechanism since childhood, as we see when she's trapped in the rubble of her home with the TV still playing the Dick Van Dyke Show.
By the end of the episode, you realize It was all a bad dream.
The concept of a suburban utopia that Wanda is describing, where problems are easily resolved with no lingering damage or effects, is a defining trope of the genre, especially in the early examples that form her initial basis of Westview. The types of shows that have informed Wanda's worldview are referred to as domestic comedies, which portray the conservative values of an idealized American life, studiously avoiding prevalent social issues such as racial discrimination and civil rights. The shows focus on mostly white middle-class families with traditional nuclear roles and imply that most domestic problems could be solved within a 30-minute time slot, always ending with a strong moral lesson. And intentionally or not, these shows created a new set of cultural values. The urban historian Robert Fishman said that the American suburban ideal was developed solely by the 19th century middle class, reflecting their economic desires and cultural values. The result is what he termed the cultural creation of the bourgeois, i.e., middle class utopia. By 1950, a huge number of Americans lived in the suburbs and chased their ideals of the times: comfort, security, and home ownership, which is exactly what we see reflected in the TV sitcoms of that era. Shows like The Dick Van Dyke Show, and for the most part, the first 2 episodes of Wandavision depict a perfect version of the suburban utopia. The inhabitants own comfy homes with everything they need and have no real worries, or at least any that they seem willing to acknowledge. In other words, they fulfilled the American dream. And in WandaVision, it's only possible because Wanda, standing in the foundations where she planned to build her home, creates it by literally altering reality. The implication is pretty clear. It takes magic to achieve the unattainable goal of the suburban utopia. Within the Hex, Wanda occupies a similar role to those of actual women living in real-life suburbs. Full-time housewife. She's initially only concerned with planning the perfect evening for her husband, only to get sidetracked by a real life or death situation. Most of her active desires within the Hex are informed by the stereotypically feminine duties mid-century women were expected to perform. She keeps up the house, plans neighborhood parties, and takes care of the kids, while Vision goes off to work. This strict adherence to gender roles was baked into the American suburban ideal and was reflected in the sitcoms that inspired Wanda's creation. In chasing the dream of suburban utopia, Wanda casts herself in that role. The thing is, if Wanda had been familiar with the effect the suburban ideal had on women, perhaps she could have avoided the Westview snafu altogether. See, in the post-suburban boom of the early 60s, feminist thinker Betty Friedan analyzed the depression and malaise affecting suburban housewives. She found that most women were unsatisfied with their apparently perfect lives and the strict gender roles they occupied. They felt a lack of drive or purpose, often extending quick household tasks over the entire day to fill the time. Many turned to alcohol and prescription meds just to get through the day. Friedan also found that despite the majority of women feeling this way, they wouldn't discuss it with their peers, because if everyone else around them seemed happy, surely they were the problem. We can feel this energy in Westview as Wanda tries to get along with her constantly grinning neighbors, who at first seem to be ideal suburban residents and not prisoners of sad witch mind magic.
Please help me. What day is it? How long has it been? Where's my phone? I have to call my sister.
No.
She's taking care of our dad. He's sick. Where's my phone?
Informed by both her research and her experience in the magazine industry, Friedan dubbed this phenomenon the Feminine Mystique. It's the false notion that the only thing women needed to live a fulfilling life was to glory in their own femininity, as defined by the culture at large. So according to society and mass media, all they needed for true happiness was to keep a house, take care of their husband, and raise the kids. These are the exact boundaries of the role Wanda cast herself in, and it's no coincidence that Friedan pointed at mass media, Wanda's main point of reference, as a major contributor to the maintenance of the feminine mystique. The dominant media image of the happy family largely adhered to the feminine mystique, which reinforced the idea that women who weren't fulfilled were abnormal. What's more, media studies only came about around the mid-70s, so folks didn't have carefully crafted video essays to critically analyze these shows. Wanda's consumption of sitcoms was also uncritical. She formed an entire coping mechanism around them, and being Sokovian wasn't close enough to American suburban life to examine it critically. It's unsurprising that she internalized these norms. It would be like if your whole conception of what Florida was like came from watching MTV spring break specials from the 90s. If you rolled up to a modern-day Daytona Beach hoping to actualize what you had seen on the screen, you'd be sorely disappointed. Also, you'd probably have a new COVID variant that emerged from a phone party. All of this explains why Wanda was never going to be able to live a happy and trauma-free life within her sitcom-based hex, regardless of all the uncontrolled chaos magic and interference from the outside forces. But just as Friedan can help us understand Wanda's misery, she also can explain the satisfaction of watching Wanda escape. Friedan argued that the only way for women to find fulfillment was to forge an identity outside of housewifeliness, saying that every woman must create, out of her own needs and abilities, a new life plan, fitting in the love and children and home that have defined femininity in the past with the work toward a greater purpose that shapes the future. We start to see Wanda doing just that. Aided in part by Agatha and Monica, she is able to break out of the feminine mystique and start to more intentionally create a new life. This destruction of the hex and embrace of a new life still carries its own sense of loss and trauma, as it requires Wanda to say goodbye / destroy her husband and sons. Friedan describes this experience of breaking out of the feminine mystique, sans witchcraft of course, as such. For the woman who moves on, there is always a sense of loss that accompanies change. It is so much easier for a woman to say yes to the feminine mystique and not risk the pains of moving on, that the will to make the effort, ambition, is as necessary as ability itself if she is going to move out of the housewife trap. In trying to force the suburban utopian fantasy into reality, Wanda experiences the feminine mystique firsthand, but eventually she realizes that the American sitcom dream isn't going to cure the pain and loss she's endured. She symbolically lets go of these unattainable ideals, undoing the hex around Westview and resolving herself to fully realize her own inherent power. I mean, she does do this by embracing her role as a witch who uses chaos magic and leaves to study the Darkhold, a literal book of the damned, but hey, at least she saw through the false promises of the American sitcom, right? Satanic magic aside, it's an apt metaphor for how the ideals of suburban America can lead women and men alike to repress key aspects of who they really are for the sake of fitting neatly into predetermined boxes. Like how I spent all of the early 90s trying to dress like Criss Cross. Y'all remember those dudes? Everything backwards? Yeah, I couldn't even pee. But once those boxes or hexes are smashed, people can fully self-actualize and become who they really are rather than playing a role. But what's next for our favorite ex-suburban witch? With Wanda set to bring her new Scarlet Witch persona into the up-and-coming Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, we can only hope she'll be able to work through all of her trauma without completely breaking bad and becoming a villain. Unless she trades her sitcoms for a binge session of Breaking Bad, in which case, we're screwed, man! But what do you guys think? Does Wandavision show us what happens when we let sitcoms inform our worldviews? Can kind of evil witches still be loving mothers for their kind of fake children? Let us know in the comments. Big thanks to our patrons for all your support. Smash that subscribe button like you're opening up a big book of satanic evil. And don't forget to ring that bell, man. And as always, thanks for watching. Peace.